Then I think what I could do is now give a general introduction to who is on our panel, who will be speaking today, and the intention of this meeting. We are very lucky to be able to meet today for several hours to discuss, generally, despite these strange circumstances, what is happening in the world of publishing and population economics. And what we will be doing today is also highlighting some of the new contributions that have come out from academics positioned in different disciplines and different fields and writing on different subjects. Of course, we also have the opportunity to review some of the new scholarship related to COVID-19. And we will also have the opportunity to have a few reflections from people who have been involved with the journal for several years. So I think without so much further ado, I can actually pass the discussion to Klaus Zimmermann, of course, editor-in-chief, who will be guiding us through the Journal of Population Economics report. So Klaus, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I have to share my screen. I'm sharing. Okay, let's see what goes on. Can you see that? Can you see this? Okay, okay, perfect. No, this is what goes on here. Okay, presentation issue. So we have to assume that's our new policy. We have to assume to be somewhere. Since the journal has its editorial office in Maastricht at United Nations and Merit Institution, we are broadcasting, so to speak, from here. So that's what we pretend to do today. That's why you see here's the entrance of UNO Merit in lovely Maastricht, where I haven't been for months now because of the usual issues. Now, why such an event at this time? We are going, at least in Europe and in the United States and some other parts of the world, through the hottest period of COVID-19. Maybe not the very hottest, maybe more things can come, we don't know. The question is, why do we do this event now? I think it's important to do it now. Well, first we present highlights from issue 1, volume 34, 2021, which is just published. So the first issue of the journal is already out in November the year before. And we have to thank Springer Nature for their performance to help us with that. Further, we need to show face at this time of the crisis and keep connectivity and global solidarity. That's, I think, very important that we owe us and the world. And we also, as a journal, we would like to test for this, how we can do this, to signal strategy. We would like to contribute even stronger to the international academic debate. We also want to signal that we will offer space for COVID-19 research in the future and show this with this issue. But also, of course, we do other things. So, for instance, I can already announce that in issue 2 of next year, we will have a focus on gender issues. So something what is not, could be, but is not necessarily related to COVID-19. Now, of course, most of you here sitting around know what the journal is. We do international research on the economics of population, household, and human resources. We are global. We are dealing with economic demography. We are applied and theory. Both is possible. We like full articles, not short notes. And we have already published this year's output and already begin to publish next year's output. We have an editor-in-chief. Well, that's what I'm doing at the moment. And we have 3 major editors, Charles Fang, Oded Gallo, and Tara McKinnish. Alessio Signo is still on the list, but that's one of the secrets which have to be released today. He will leave the position as editor at the end of 2020 for many good reasons, unfortunately. Well, we have 2 managing editors. We have seen already Michaela Vanor, and there will be also Madeline Zawodny guiding us through the last part of the day. In addition to that, we have about 36 associate editors. Many of those are present here today, and we claim and want to be the leading population economics journal in the profession. Well, in coverage, we are still focusing a lot of Europe. 40% of our submissions come from Europe, about 20% from North America, maybe not enough, but a rising number comes from Asia and the Middle East, about 30%. Visits is more in favor of North America. North Americans look at us. They not necessarily publish in the Journal of Population Economics enough. Maybe this has to be changed. Now, in terms of first time to decisions, we are now with about 40 days, 39 days exactly in 2019, but this number has to be taken cautious because it combines desk rejections with long-term considerations. I come back to that in a second. Well, 2020, we expect a final acceptance rate at about 4.5% out of predicted nearly 900 submissions. Yes, this came a little bit as a surprise because last year we had 617 submissions. We have a huge rise, so this means about 50% rise in submissions. So we are flooded every day. I have 10 or so manuscripts on my desk these days. Now, in terms of what many people are looking at, or also it's sometimes misleading, is the social science citation impact factor. We have been 1.8 as a relatively high level in the last round, and we ranked highly in many other lists, as you may know or have seen. Now, many people, if some of you, and I think many of you may consider or have considered submitting to the journal, what is good in increasing technically speed of decision making is that in your first submission, you have already a conflict of interest statement in there. Often also forget that it delayed when the electoral office asks for that before it goes on. Some people think they can have long online appendices. We don't publish online appendices. So you have to read a little bit. That's what I recommend people who submit for the first time, the submission guidelines. Not everything has to be, of course, followed at the first submission, because first you need to be seriously considered, but there are core issues like the ones I mentioned. Now, what we do is we have a two-type strategy like most top journals. Is we have a large bulk of the submissions are desk rejected. About 2/3 is our policy, our idea. And the rest, so this, we want to reach this very fast. And the other side, as soon as we look at the manuscript, we take our time. Yes, this doesn't mean that it takes very many months, but we would like to have a serious evaluation of what we deal with. Often people say, oh, it's a labor paper, can I submit? Well, labor economics is labor journals. We have a demographic focus, so you have to be cautious about what the demographic aspect of it is. And so else we are very flexible, theory, applied, education, public development, all kinds of issues, environment, whatever, yes. But another issue often we are asked, can we publish a special issue? We have so many submissions, we do not publish special issues. We publish only with the material we get submitted. However, we have a focus from time to time. Mostly we focus around topics. So at the moment we look at COVID papers, but also in the next issue on gender topics. And migration is a regular topic we are dealing with. This is what you should remember. We like to have and publish ready and full-length articles, not short notices, innovative articles with a clear contribution, get clearly priority. And we also do a lot with promotion after acceptance. What we do today is a kind of innovation for us. We present an issue which has just come out, which is fresh. Just published in November, completely online. The printed issue is on the way, but not at least not on my desk yet. So it's on the, I'm sure, on the way. Now today, this issue we have 4 parts. There's a lead paper which we always single out which we find particularly interesting from a particular aspect. Of course, all papers are interesting, but this one is the one we have chosen today, and we will hear in a moment about it, names and behavior in a war. Interesting topic. Then we have 2 papers on household economics and 3 papers on migration and 4 papers on COVID-19. Since the Kuznets Prize is on a COVID-19 paper, and well, COVID-19 is the issue of the day, we would like to show our strengths to have reacted very quickly to the situation with very good papers indeed, which have been evaluated and published at very short notice, and we would like to present them. We have all the authors of the 4 papers present and the Kuznets Prize winners anyway. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for the beginning. I'm looking forward to an exciting, in my side, afternoon, and wherever it is, it should be exciting. Let's see how it goes. Thank you very much. Back to Michaela.
Thank you very much, Klaus. We are just a little bit behind time, so I think I can immediately turn over to one of the other editors for the journal, Tara McInnish, who is coming to us from the University of Colorado Boulder. Tara will be leading the session related to the lead paper of issue 1, Names and Behaviors in a War. Tara, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, so I would like to introduce Stepan Urata, who will present his lead paper from our January 2021 issue, Names and Behavior in War, that is joint work with his co-author, Dejan Kovac. Stefan, you have 20 minutes to present, and then we will have 10 minutes of discussion. I invite everyone to submit questions for the discussion period while they are viewing the presentation. Attendees can do this through the Q&A function, and panelists can do this through the chat function. Stepan, please go ahead.
And there you go. Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the journal, the editors for giving us this opportunity to advertise our work. And Dejan, who is also here, is ready to answer questions in the Q&A in the chat. And my instruction is to go for 20 minutes of a presentation. So this paper looks at a question of how does one study political values and wars, the relationship between wars and political values. There is much work, obviously, in political science that suggests that nationalism or patriotism are important drivers of violent conflicts. And there's also a rapidly growing literature, mainly within economics, based on voting, election behavior, that implies that wars have long-lived effects on political identity. So 70 years later, after World War II, you can still see effects of conflicts long gone. Now, so an important question in this literature, therefore, is to what extent the persistence that we see of the effects that wars have on political values is driven by intergenerational transmission of values within families, as opposed to other society-wide effects. Now, the problem with answering this question, of course, is that we do now have multi-generation surveys on political values within families, but they only cover very recent events. They don't allow you to go back and study many important historical settings, including wars. So therefore, the little work that is out there typically relies on proxy measures. Now, ideally, such proxy measures for political values should predict behavior, should be consistent over time and space, and be linkable across various data sources. And you know this paper is about names, so we use names to provide such a proxy for a value that is closely linked to nationalism or patriotism, but that is even more specific and that is in general intrinsically difficult to elicit in any survey, even in modern multi-generation surveys. And the value is the willingness to die for one's country in a war for national independence. The setting is Croatia. This is a scary person. If the photo scares you, there's a good reason for that. This is the dictator of World War II fascist government in Croatia by the name of Ante Pavelić. And we're going to link the World War II history to the more recent war in Croatia, the 91 to 95 war for independence, which was an all-out, massive conflict between mainly Serbian forces, the Yugoslav National Army, and initially, at least, volunteer-based Croatian army. Now, this is the point of departure for this paper. The blue line tells you that the popularity, the use of the name Ante, which is again the first name of the World War II dictator in Croatia, and the regime back then established concentration camps, killed hundreds of thousands of Serbs, anti-fascist Croats, Jews, Roma. It was as ugly a fascist regime as you can imagine. So obviously the name of the leader of that regime was popular during World War II, but you can see that it regains popularity after 1970, and it, again, is particularly popular during the War of Independence, 91 to 95. Now, that might be suggestive of some relationship between the use of this name and values. Well, we're going to explore that in this paper. So the preview of the results is that we're going to show that this first name and a broader set of first names, but that we're going to call nationalist first names, but I will not have the time to go into that in detail, that these names contain a clear signal about patriotism in that they predict volunteering for the War of Independence on the Croatian side and being killed in action, killed in battle in that war, which is at least consistent with fighting more bravely, valiantly, being more interested in winning this war. Now, so after we establish the information content of those first names, we're going to use the universe of birth certificates for Croatia from 1930 to 2010 to study the spread of these values and its intergenerational transmission. And our findings there, which are going to be mainly on our findings on the intergenerational transmission, which will be basically focused on 91 to 95 again, will be consistent with the presence of purposeful transmission of these values within families, within the set of models initiated by Bisson and Verdier, the models of cultural transmission. We also showed that names predict right-wing voting 20 years after the war, and which is consistent with the other literature out there on long-term political identity effects of wars. And thanks to birth certificates, our argument is that this approach is widely applicable in several countries, and I'll come to that in 30 minutes. Obviously, there's a lot of related work on the persistence of political values, on right-wing attitudes within families. It's fairly recent work from Europe. There's also an interesting paper on the intergenerational transmission of war service from the US, not of military service in peacetime, but service during wars. But that's just in terms of the background. Obviously, there's a large literature on child first name choices that signal cultural or religious identity, racial attributes, and have been used to study historical socioeconomic mobility. However, we appear to be the first study that uses these name choices for political values, in particular for the willingness to sacrifice your life for your country. So the War of Independence involved almost 500,000 male soldiers on the Croatian side, and we have data on all of them. About 6,000 of them were killed in action. Overall, the conflict killed about 20,000 people, mostly civilians. It was one of the bloodiest conflicts in Europe after World War II, at least until Ukraine. And we merged these veteran lists and information on them with municipal level data from the 91 Croatian census based on very detailed municipalities. I'm going to explain why that matters. And we're going to focus in particular on a subset of municipalities that were exposed to extensive occupation or combat. We're going to call them the siege settlements. This is actually actually a set that's well defined within Croatian law, in fact. And they roughly correspond to the blue part of Croatia that you see on the upper left corner of the graph, which is roughly the part of Croatia that was occupied for 3 or 4 years by Serbian or other forces. Okay, the Croatian army consisted initially mainly from volunteers, but a massive draft started in the second half of '91. Now the war basically ended by 2 major offensives in '95, but in the middle 3 years, it was entrenched. You were sitting in trenches, so there was a lot of fighting in the first couple of months with the Serb Yugoslav National Army tanks rolling into Croatia, and then at the end, and that corresponds to the monthly killed in action death rates, where early on these are particularly high for draftees. Now draftees may be also less experienced soldiers. The volunteers are, at least based on anecdotal evidence, more likely to have had previous army experience. And then at the end of the war, again, there's more fighting and more deaths in battle. What kind of names are we going to look at? Well, we're primarily going to focus on this name Ante, which corresponds to the World War II leader, but we have another set of nationalist names. No time to go into that. We're also most of the analysis is going to be based on the subset of these veterans who have Croatian, that is Catholic, first names, so as to exclude from the analysis Croatian citizens who happen to be ethnic Serbians or Muslims. So it actually doesn't matter very much, but just so those of you who know more about Croatia wouldn't need to worry about it. And then we track the use of name patterns over the 3 million male birth certificates during 20th century. And other than the name Ante, you can think of kind of placebo tests. We also look at separate specific names that appear in the top 10 list of names to see whether other popular names also behave differently in terms of their information content. Now, the first outcome we're going to look at has to do with volunteering. The draft was named blind, so the volunteers move first, then the draft comes. So you can think of this as a choice-based sample. Actually, the kind of weighting that we apply doesn't make much of a difference. And then the second regression we're going to run is going to look at the probability of being killed in action. Now, here we face a major obstacle in that we don't have rank information. In any war, soldiers with higher rank are less likely to be killed. And also, I already mentioned that volunteers may be more experienced and also may progress to higher ranks earlier. So what we're going to do to avoid the problems of not having rank data is that we're going to focus on draftees during the first half year of the war. So this minimizes the issue of not being able to control for rank. That's also where most of the deaths of soldiers actually occurs, as you've seen a minute ago. Okay, so let me focus on the first and the last column here. This is a simple least squares regressions, or least square regression. We get very similar findings from your nonlinear binary outcome models. So Antes are about 6 percentage points more likely to volunteer. And if you look at the last column, there's an interaction between Ante and siege settlement. So what is the effect of being called Ante and having been born in a village, in a municipality that is under enemy occupation, right? If you add that up, it's roughly 12 percentage points. The other nationalist names also have appear important in terms of predicting volunteering, but so do other top 10 names. So on the other hand, if we compare Ante to any other top 10 name, it comes up on top with, I think, the exception of Mario. So, we think this is fairly strong evidence that Antes are different in this regard. And if we look at the probability of being killed in action, then again, Antes are significantly more likely to be killed in action. But there is no interaction with the siege settlement. Now, remember that the volunteers move first, so the more nationalist Antes are probably among the volunteers. This regression is based only on the draftees. That may explain the lack of that interaction. But again, Ante, if we compare it one by one to other top 10 names, comes up on top as the one that has the strongest and largest predictive power for the probability of dying in battle. How large are these coefficients? Well, the effect of Ante, being called Ante, on volunteering is roughly comparable to the effect of your place of birth being under enemy siege. The death rate of early draftees on average is close to 2 percentage points. So being Ante increases these risks of dying in battle by about a half. So I would argue that both of these effects are actually fairly large. All right, so now that we have established the information content of these first names, and again, it's just a proxy, we're going to use this proxy to study nationalism, patriotism, and its relationship to wars. Now, in purely descriptive part of the paper, we showed that the popularity of Antes does not increase as much towards the War of Independence in locations where concentration camps were placed during World War II. We also showed that the popularity of these names is particularly high in the settlements that were under enemy occupation after the siege ends, after Croatian forces take control, and that they're also particularly high in places where there was a lot of fighting during the War of Independence. So that is at least descriptive evidence, but broadly consistent with the idea that these names carry information about political values. Now, we're going to look at the intergenerational transmission of nationalism. And basically the question we're going to ask is whether fathers who are named Ante are more or less likely to name their sons born during the War of Independence, when obviously nationalism was riding high, whether they're more likely to name their sons Ante, depending on whether the use of this name, and by our interpretation, the prevalence of these nationalist patriotic values has already been high in previous couple of years. Now, this is a question that's relevant within the Bisson and Verdier model, where if there's a shock that strengthens a particular value, the parents should invest more into inculcating those values into their offspring. But in the model, they are aware that the society at large could obliquely introduce those values to their offspring. So there is a substitution that plays out in the parental decision, whether they should invest or whether they will leave the society to inculcate those values to their children. And the alternative story is that, well, there are these waves of popularity, and every parent, nationalistic or non-nationalistic, just rides the local popularity wave. This is a well-established fact. Some names just become popular and then they become less popular again. So what we find is that the antefathers, that is, in our interpretation, the fathers that are more nationalistic or more patriotic, are less likely to transmit their name to their sons when the share of Antes among newborns is particularly high in their municipality as of a couple of years previously. So this is consistent with the conscious trade-off on the part of parents between those two sources of values, being introduction of values to their offspring. And it's consistent, therefore, with the model. The coefficients to focus on are at the bottom of the column 1 and 2, where the negative coefficient corresponds to the probability of the son being called Ante when the father is not called Ante, whereas the second column, when the father is called Ante. So these fathers, these nationalist fathers, do trade off with are conscious of this trade-off with the oblique transition of values. Whereas in column 2, those are the other fathers, the potentially non-nationalist fathers, and they just ride the wave. They just move in tandem, one-to-one, with the local popularity of that name. Okay, and finally, in the last part of the analysis, we look at parliamentary elections in 2015. That's 20 years after the war. The nice feature about this election is that you can actually, for the first time, see in Croatia preferential votes being cast for individual candidates. So the first finding is that in municipalities where there are more Antes among newborns, there's also a higher share of extreme right-wing parties. Now, there's a well-established, often government right-wing party that's well linked to, the history of Croatia. But we're looking at the right-wing parties that are to the right of this large party. So these are really extreme French parties, and their vote share actually grows. Again, quantitatively, it's a large difference when there are more Antes born among newborns. Again, consistent with the idea that even 20 years afterward, this name somehow is related to right-wing attitudes. The slates of the extreme right-wing parties actually exhibit a much higher share of Ante candidates than other shares. And finally, those Antes who appear on these right-wing slates, candidate lists in parliamentary elections, do receive significantly higher share of preferential votes, but only in the areas where there was more fighting during the War of Independence, basically the areas close to the Serbian and Bosnian border. So again, all of this together is consistent with both the notion that parents inculcate values together with this particular name that are right-wing values and nationalist or patriotic values, if you will, and also potentially the notion that if I'm voting for somebody and I don't know the candidate personally, I'm not familiar with the candidate's values, the name may actually provide me with a signal of who is, a more of a hardcore member of a right-wing party. Okay, so let me conclude. 2 more minutes. So we demonstrate that values presumably inculcated by parents drive volunteering for wartime service and dying in the war, and so this is consistent with within family intergenerational transmission of values, and it shows that this political identity really matters in high-stakes situations. Based on these name proxies, we suggest that nationalism spiked during the War of Independence, and especially in areas directly affected by military operations. We also have we could also stretch a little bit our evidence to suggest that that rise in the popularity of the use of these names before the War of Independence suggests, accumulation of nationalist, tensions perhaps, or at least more salient nationalism in the population. We also provide evidence that is consistent with the idea that nationalist fathers are conscious of the kind of bis in vergine trade-off between alternative trade transition channels. And we show that these values still have an effect on Croatian voting behavior 20 years after the war. And our main point in this largely measurement-driven paper is to suggest that thanks to the existence of birth certificates in just about every country, this approach is actually applicable to many settings. You can go back to post-World War II Germany and look at first names that correspond to, leaders of the World War II regime. You can look within Ukraine and compare the Russian versus the Ukrainian version of the same first name. You can look at the first names of Civil War generals in the US, and et cetera, et cetera. And the use of birth certificates provides you not only with the ability to trace these values, if you can first establish their information content for behavior, but it naturally allows you to study intergenerational transmission. And with that, let me conclude. I think I'm just about on time.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Okay, so now we will move into discussion, and our first question from the Q&A function asks a question about the relationship you find between being named Anta and being more likely to be killed in action in the war. And the question proposes maybe one reason for this relationship is that having that name affects how you're affected in the if you're captured, maybe you're more likely to be executed because of your name. And have you considered that as an explanation for that relationship?
So we include among the killed in action those who died in captivity, but it's actually a relatively small group, and the results are fully robust to excluding this group. Most of the deaths actually occur directly in the battle as a result of wounds sustained in battle. But it's a good question in general. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Second question is, do you have any information whether the naming is related to any other household characteristics, such as education, that might also affect things like choice to volunteer for the military?
Right. So that is a very important question indeed. So we do not have in this otherwise amazing database of veterans, right? This is the Veteran Administration data on 500,000 soldiers, which is otherwise amazing, but we do not observe individual level education. So what we have done instead is, again, I already mentioned this, we know the place of birth. And this is actually a detailed definition of about 6,000 tiny municipalities where people were born. And so what we do, we do know the education structure of these municipalities. So we have re-estimated all of the relationships that I've presented on subsets of places of birth within Croatia that are more rural versus more urban, more agricultural, less agricultural, higher education. We split it into terciles, and these relationships hold within each of these groups. So while we cannot deal with this question at the individual level, we believe that the full robustness to studying within rural places of birth, within highly educated places of birth, and that these relationships are robust, that provides some degree of comfort.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So is there any information or evidence on whether military service itself affects whether the father's military service affects whether or not they choose to name their child a nationalistic name like Anta?
So we haven't looked at whether the participation in the conflict itself changes that. Because we cannot link the birth certificates from the post-war era to individual soldiers. However, for the subset of soldiers who were wounded and to some degree disabled, I mean, there's a continuous degree of kind of handicap as a result of injury in battle. For those soldiers who were wounded and to some degree disabled, we do observe their children because they receive some benefits, and we know the names of the children. And so for this selective subset, this is tentative evidence because this is a selective subset of those soldiers who were seriously injured during battle. But for those soldiers, we show in the paper that the more carnage you have experienced in your military unit, the more of your comrades have died in battle, the less likely you are to give this name, which we will call nationalist name, to your sons born after the war. Now that will be consistent with the kind of direct carnage experience actually dampening the transmission of these values, which is still, I think, fully consistent with the idea that regions that are more exposed to war are actually not dampening, but heightening the transmission, right? But that can operate differently based on individual experience, whether it's direct or indirect.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation.
Thank you again for having us.
Yes, and I'll turn it back to Michaela to move us on the program.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for a really interesting presentation and discussion. I think you've gotten us off on a very good start. I think now we can move to the second panel, which will be looking at the Kuznets Prize for 2021. And we're very lucky to have in some way two chairpersons for the session. We of course have Klaus Zimmermann as editor-in-chief, but we're also very grateful to welcome Bartel van der Walle, who is the new director of the United Nations University Merit, and will be also giving us a few words. I think perhaps then I turn over to Klaus and to Bartel. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much. So I perhaps should first briefly show what we are talking about, so to speak. I would like to share with you the, where is it? It's still, okay. Can you see this? Hello?
Yes.
This is the Kuznets Prize certificate, which we will give, of course, not in person, but per mail to our Kuznets Prize winners. But the Kuznets Prize ceremony will be done by Bartel, who accepted to deliver the prize speech. So I just hand over to Bartel to talk about the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Maybe I should quickly say a few words who I am and why I'm here. So I'm Bartel van der Walle. I'm the director of UNU Merit. That is a research institute from the United Nations University. It's an institute that's based in Maastricht in the Netherlands, from where I'm talking to you. The institute focuses on social and economic research related to many of the great challenges that we face today, guided by the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, of course, an important approach by the UN to address these problems, to tackle them, and to hopefully also come up with some solutions. Within the Institute, we have 7 research groups that range from complexity studies, economic complexity, innovation, governance, entrepreneurship, migration, social protection, and also population development and labor economics. And that is where Klaus is active with us at the Institute, where he is leading that research group for us. So I'm very pleased to be here and to also be able to say a few words on behalf of the Institute. So on behalf of UNU Merit, very happy and honored to be here. Klaus, thank you for the invitation. I would now go to the prize speech, if that is correct, Klaus. That is now the next thing on the agenda. Thank you. So as you know, Simon Kuznets was a pioneer in populations economics and a professor emeritus at Harvard University. He was also the 1971 Nobel Prize laureate in economics. It's a while ago. You may remember that, or you may have read about that. But annually, the editors of the Journal of Population Economics award a prize in his name, the Kuznets Prize, to the best paper that is published in the year. And we're together here today to celebrate the 2021 Kuznets Prize for the best paper in 2020. More specifically, in volume number 33 of the journal. Young-Soo, who is an assistant professor at Jinan University, He Chen is an associate professor at Yale, and Wei Shi, associate Jinan University, have received the 2021 Kuznets Prize for their article, and I quote, "Impacts of Social and Economic Factors on the Transmission of Coronavirus Disease 2019, as known by all of us now as COVID-19 in China." That article was published in the Journal of Population Economics in, as I said, volume 33. And I even have the page numbers for you if you want to look it up, 1127 to 1172. So a quite comprehensive paper. The paper itself pioneered the analysis of the spread of the coronavirus and the containment efforts in China between January 19 and February 29 of this year. We all remember, I think, the images that we've seen on television at the time of the enormous efforts by the Chinese government to contain the spread. And probably still very few of us were considering that we would be here in this situation now, today. So the study by these 3 authors found that stringent quarantine, city lockdown, local public health measures imposed since late January in China, in Wuhan, significantly decreased the virus transmission rate. I think that sounds all too familiar to all of us. The population outflow, that was another finding, from the outbreak source region posed a higher risk to the destination regions and other factors, including geographic proximity and similarity in economic conditions. You can imagine that in, for instance, Europe, this is a finding that's extremely relevant, given that we are all closely related to each other, have many borders with many countries, all of us here in Europe. Over 1.4 million infections and 56,000 deaths could have been avoided, according to the estimates based on the analysis of the authors. And most effective was found to be a city lockdown first, followed by close management of communities and family outdoors restrictions. It is very clear today to all of us that in many ways, this paper, this experience that was documented in the paper brought guidance for other countries all over the world. The paper got a standard strict referee evaluation by the journal, by 3 anonymous reviewers, who, of course, we should thank enormously for their efforts, was including revised and resubmit published online already on May 9. So that was a very fast turnaround for this paper. And today, a few months later, the paper has received global recognition and respect. And you can see that by, amongst others, over 32,000 accesses on Springer Nature website alone, and already over 100 Google citations. It is clear that with this paper, the authors have produced a significant piece of work, a thorough piece of research with an impact that is beyond China and globally has an impact. Especially as the director of UNU Merit, that is exactly the research that we also love and like to do ourselves. So I'm only here to congratulate the author team on behalf of UNU Merit and all of us and Klaus and the journal. Also, congratulations to the responsible editor, Klaus, yourself, and the team of referees who made it possible that this paper got published so fast. Thank you very much and congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bartel. Great that we could have you here to get your insights, but also which gives me the chance to thank you and UNU Merit for supporting also the Journal of Population Economics, because we are supported by your institution, and we could manage to do these things we are talking about. We all know that since you are also in a period of transition here at a very complicated time, you're very busy, so we would excuse you if you don't have time to join us for much longer. So I thank you very much for your intervention, and I would like to now go over to the second part of the ceremony, which is a kind of more personal talk. But first, we may want to ask the authors maybe to quickly respond to your intervention before it goes on. So I'm not sure who has volunteered to lead among the three. Either one or all three are invited to now say a few things.
I could say a few things.
Actually,
yeah. Thank you. So if I could represent three of us to say a few things, we feel truly humbled to receive this prestigious award. We really would like to thank the wonderful, the tireless efforts made by the editor, the three anonymous reviewers for this honor, and we appreciate the peer researchers who have helped us improve this study during the process, and the media coverage that filled the gap between the scientific world and the public. So I want to acknowledge Drs. Qiu Yun and Shi Wei. I'm so pleased to be able to work together with you guys. And while we could praise so many of you for making this happen, I'm going to end with just one person, the editor-in-chief of the journal, Professor Dr. Klaus Zimmermann, for the careful and efficient handling of our submission. Your wonderful efforts and leadership well balanced the scientific rigor and the timely and jargon-free delivery of the key message to the public. So your efforts may also set a record to my own knowledge of a major economics journal in their response to a global emergency. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Xi, for your nice words. Of course, this is just, so to speak, normal business. However, I admit that it was necessary to be particularly active in such a critical situation. It's not a normal review process. We aim at high quality papers, but we normally take many months to achieve that. But here, this was not possible. Otherwise, we would be not there. It was clear that we should have been out very early, and it was a painful, so to speak, period of weeks, not only for the authors, but also for the referees and of course also the editor and so on. But on the other hand, we enjoyed all that a lot, and in particular when we see the output and the tremendous response we got from the inner circles, but also from outside on this paper. Yes, so that is yeah. Now this gives me the chance to move over to, let's say, a more relaxed exchange. To learn more, since we decided against, so to speak, presenting again the core of the research through the authors, we thought it's better maybe to learn a little bit more about who are these people who managed to write in short notice a seminal paper, but it probably will become, yes. How is it to write a seminal article is certainly part of the idea what I would like to talk about. But before we go there, maybe all three could say a little bit about you. Who are you? What are you doing normally? Are you really a COVID-19 or epidemic analysis researcher, whatever, health economist? Who are you? Maybe if you can start, but also let the other two get in.
Yeah, just lady first. Maybe Dr. Chiu, could you go ahead?
Okay.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I'm actually an environmental economics, but I'd like to collaborate with people in other fields or other disciplines. So most of the time I work on socio-economic impacts of climate change and air pollution in China. So mostly the productivity and health impacts of climate change and air pollution. Well, for my dissertation, I actually work on the coastal adaptation policies in the US. But as we all know that China also faces the risks from climate change and sea level rises. So I also want to expand that strand of research to China context. Of course, from this year, we start to work on COVID-19. So I didn't expect myself to work on this field. So actually this paper is my first publication that is not in an environmental related journal. So I really feel very lucky. And I think, from my own experience, I think we work on this project mostly because of the people that I love. So my classmates, my co-authors, and also my colleagues who were born in Wuhan or are related to Wuhan. So by that time, during the epidemic outbreak, we really want to do something for them. Okay. So Wei, do you want to join in?
Hi. Thanks very much, Klaus, for these kind words. And my name is Wei Shi, also from Jinan University. So my main research areas are related to spatial econometrics. And so naturally, it looks at the interactions between people, between regions. And so when the COVID-19 this pandemic broke out, and so a natural question is, so how does different regions interact together through the flows of populations, and what optimal policies should that give rise to? So so it was also my kind of exploration onto a new topic, but this is a kind of one of the big challenges of the day. So we just want to do our part in the process. So and of course, thank you very much for Klaus for providing us this platform so that we can contribute into this effort. Also, thank you very much for the staff at the journal and the reviewers for the paper and our colleagues.
Thank you so much, everyone. So my name is Xi Chen. I'm Associate Professor of Health Policy and Economics at Yale University. My research focuses on public policies relating population aging and life health. So it's very much concentrated on economics of aging. So you could say that this aging is pretty much dealing with non-communicable disease. So, but this time we work together on the communicable disease, which is a global emergency. So why we could work together, I think partly because we have much complementarity in our research field of focus. So like Dr. Shi already mentioned, he has been an expert on spatial interaction modeling, spatial econometrics, which is being intensively used in this paper. And Dr. Chu is the environmental economist and who has been using the weather data, the climate change data, and our instrument variable, the key instrument variable for this study is using the weather data. So, but of course, this is a health related question and health economics, a health policy issue. So that's why I joined the force. So I learned quite a bit from my co-authors in areas of their expertise, and we are all economists but working in different subfields. So I think that really speaks to the power of the economics language. Although we work on very different subfields, but we can come together and work on things of global emergency in such a short time frame. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your first responses. And we understand now that you are two different type of people who by accident, somehow by this event came together. You already described the advantages of the team, but why is this group? And why did you dare to, of course, you all, I mean, you all have a Chinese ethnic relationship, but there are many other Chinese. Why is this way? And okay, two of you are at Jinan University, yes, but that may be one thing. But what more, and why is this team? And also, I mean, how could you dare to touch that issue? Frankly, at the time, immediately I thought, oh, this is a very important problem for Europe and Germany, but I didn't dare to put together a team so early, because I said all what we see and know at that time. It was my first reaction. It will be all preliminary, all data. It will be noisy and so on. It will be difficult to get the data. Now China is even more complex than Germany. Yes, if I may say this. To do, yes, I mean it's a huge country and so on. So what made you so risk oriented to take over, to invest in this project?
I could go ahead if yeah.
Whatever you, I mean, whoever wants to deal with, or you all could answer issues or whatever.
In short, that demonstrates the power of economic thinking and economic tools. Although we work on different fields, and for me, it's more about aging, non-communicable disease, but we could use economics language and tools to work on something we are less familiar with, but the power of the thinking and the tools would be very helpful. And I would say I never felt such an urgency to write such a research paper. I think this could be the most productive experience of ever that I have worked on economics paper. So we worked day and night because the data is coming out every day, and we try to wrap up a manuscript and submit and try to inform the world when China went through this major outbreak. And I remember at that time, Italy and some other European countries started to experience the major transmissions and the national lockdown. But by then, in the US, there was nothing mentioning about anything related to like strict enforcement of public health measures. So we would expect that since this is a communicable disease spreading very quickly, so the other Western societies will also go through this process, but probably less prepared due to the decentralization and the individualism. So China used the so-called extreme experience, but still may have other countries. I think until today, it still has have some relevance because with the surging cases, and we have some promising news about vaccines over the last few days. But we could say that still without a vaccine, many other countries are able to manage largely manage this disease spreading. So we use we call the non-pharmaceutical interventions, like the regions in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Singapore, in many countries, and they are able to return to some degree of normalcy without vaccine. So the local, regional, and the national public health measures could still help in the era that we have no vaccine available. So that's why we thought this message could be very helpful, because we know that developing a vaccine usually takes years. So the experience in China could be helpful to others. And nowadays, and Dr. Chiu and Dr. Xu and I, we have been also thinking about how to optimize, because we all know that people have COVID fatigue. It's even harder for people to accept the idea of lockdown or stringent restrictions. So we need to optimize the lockdown. So that's a new topic we are working on, but it's an extension of this study published in Journal of Population Economics. So I would just say that this published work really inspired us to think more optimally about potential policies in the future.
Yeah, it seems that while your findings were quite, should have been quite helpful in guiding other nations, many nations were a little bit hesitant to follow. And I have to admit that I also thought at the beginning that a complete lockdown might be not so the best solution, because at the end it's behavior and not the lockdown as such. It's behavior of individual people, and you cannot do it forever. I mean, you cannot have the lockdown forever. And we see now in Europe that we had a lockdown in Italy or in Germany or in Austria, just to say a few examples, or in France. But we have now a second wave, which is much harder than the first wave. So we haven't learned enough in terms of behavior in between. So it's really, I mean, the problem is it's how can we change behavior? And so there is lots of room, I see, for research which is outside of natural sciences. Yes, we can say, oh, it's not our job. Other disciplines should solve the problem, but economists have a lot to say about behavior, and some of the biologists also think that behavior is an important issue. Now, the key problem, of course, to admit, I saw when we looked at your paper is that, well, all is a problem of data, yes, and why data collection is certainly in many ways very efficient in China, but it's also in some of the Western countries in Europe where we know the data is very noisy and very bad. We had lots of discussions, and so the question is, how robust are really what you found? So what would you, I mean, honestly, so to speak, I mean, in 5 years, if somebody is recalculating history, so to speak, not your data as such, but history, would you still think that the major findings will stand?
Yes, I think actually as time goes by, we learn more things about the COVID-19 virus, and especially there are some kind of peculiar things with the COVID-19 virus. I said like some of the super spreader might be responsible for most of the infections. So these things, as time goes by, we learn new things, and we can adapt our behavior, and we can get more knowledge from the data. So these are all natural process, but as things goes by, we can learn new things and move forward.
Okay, so our time is a little bit running. I have to look at the watch, but we still have one possible question, which I'm interested in as the editor of a journal which wants to be serving and helpful, but also has to make difficult decisions practically every day, which are sometimes harsh and and so on. Now, in economics, we have typically very long processes, from initial submitting up to, revisions and final publications. It can take 5 years or something easily with a top journal, as many of us know, to get the paper published. And nowadays you have longer online appendices than the paper itself is, and so on and so on and so on. So what in this situation, this was possible to handle it like that. And we still have a high quality paper. That's what I'm very convinced of. Now, but nevertheless, what can we learn from the process? For instance, in your case, I have to admit, we have solved the, let's say, administrative issues, which are sometimes hindering a fast process. People may not believe in that, but the initial submission process may cause a lot of delays. Already, we have, so to speak, solved that parallel, because out of the normal routine, yes, we handle the submission, yes. Now, also the referees were willing to respond within, whatever, was it 10 days or a week or something like that. That's very unusual for economics. Impossible. People call me crazy if I ask that sometimes. Yes, because sometimes, but in other disciplines, it's quite normal that people do, and not only that you not only get 1 report, you get 5 reports. Yes, or 2 reports, you get 5 reports. Why so? And also often, delays not only come from referees and editors who are slow or whatever, but from authors who fail to respond when it's on the table. It takes them, if you give them half a year, they take half a year. If you give them a year, they take a year to resubmit. Yeah, so what can we learn something from your experience, you all three, if you have some ideas, what we can do better, or what we have made particularly well in this aspect?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think our engagement conversations with the journal have been a very good one. We owe so much to the wonderful efforts by the editors and the 3 anonymous reviewers. I think they returned the review report within 2 weeks, such a short time frame, and they devoted much efforts, very detailed and constructive comments. I think the editors and reviewers are the key to the success of this article, and also set up a model for me for my future role as a referee. So especially during the pandemic, it's really hard to be giving a timely response to the review request. So I think, I think I really should ask this question to Dr. Zimmerman, because your handling of this paper is really balancing the scientific rigor and timely, rigorously deliver the message to the public in such a short time frame. And I still remember in the last round, you were mentioning to us that what's the key message you want to tell the public. And so that's why we transform some of the modeling to some key messages understandable to the public. I think that's really helpful for the future reference citations and the understanding by the public. That's the key, I believe.
Yeah, okay. One conclusion for me also out of this process was that we, while we may not like it because it has to be, it puts pressure, but and it's also may look sometimes random for outsiders, that we may have to have different speeds, let's say, between types of articles. There are some articles which have a more long-run perspective and so to speak, not being in the middle of a real clear, concrete debate, which may at time is maybe not so relevant, and where we may have maybe a longer process, because we cannot overuse our referees. Yes, I mean, if you have hundreds of submissions to really look at hard, and if you multiply it by 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 referees, and you have a huge amount of reports to deal with and to supervise. So that is, and so one has also to be to ask authors in general, not you here, but in general, understand that there are sometimes also longer processes. We cannot decide everything overnight. If you, I mean, as the editors, we come now to the role of the editor in the next round, so to speak, as it leads to the next panel, so to speak, publishing in population economics or publishing at all. I mean, the editors are spending a huge amount, and referees a huge amount of work. What everybody is sharing in the profession is load and is why. But this leads to the next panel. So I thank you very much, all three of you. Thank you very much for being partners in this process, and I hope the best for the article, of course, because this also helps the journal to flourish, and we will see what we can learn for the forthcoming processes. Now I give back to Michaela to lead us to the next round.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you for your interventions on the processes that shape the paper. I think, as Klaus mentioned, we're going now into a session that is very much so focusing on publishing processes. And this next session will feature both current and former editors who are reflecting a little bit on publishing in the field of population economics. And of course, there will also be some more personal reflections on the role of our retiring editor, Alessandro Signo. So I think I can turn back over to Klaus, actually, to lead us into the next discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, the intelligence test is how to share the screen. And we have already that here seen, no longer relevant. We have to go to another presentation. Hopefully this time I make it nicer. Hopefully you can see that presentation. Again, Uno Merit now on top, not on the bottom of the page, but it's still Uno Merit. I'm not sitting in Maastricht, unfortunately. It's a very lovely city. I'm sitting in lovely Bonn, which is now driving from my home. So I wish I could be more often these days there, but that's very critical at the moment to do. Now, we are now in the panel Publishing and Population Economics, and I would like to make first a few introductory remarks before I introduce the panel members and let the thing go. So I will speak a little bit, and then all members will share their views. The Journal of Population Economics has a long history, which is longer than 33 years. We have 33 issues now, and for the journal, and the origins of the journal have a connection to the origins of ESPE, the European Society for Population Economics, where many people, many of us have met in 1987. This is a picture of a group photo, which we cannot do today, unfortunately. It would look much different. Well, if you would do a group photo today with all of them on a picture, we could not find us. We cannot find us, but also here it's sometimes difficult. Actually, I could easily find out where Pierre Piestiot is, and others, people like John Ermisch and other early people, which have been editors of the Journal of Population Economics, including Bernard van Praag, and so on. But I can only guess where Alessandro Signo was standing, but he must have been there, and he was there, I guess, because I could find him in Group 2 Demographic Economics in the session on fertility chaired by Alois Wenig, and which includes him as a speaker on the microeconomic analysis of the timing of birth, a paper together with John Ermisch. So, also now it becomes clear that the journal started in 1988, a year later, and you see the cover page of number 1 of volume 1, which was very, very thin. If you compare this today, a few pages only, so to speak. less than 90 papers, 90 pages for paper. But if you look at the list of editors, you see him, Alessandro Silvio first, Pierre Pistio, who's also now on the panel, and two others, Bernard van Praag and Bob Willis from Chicago, which were on the first round. Now, the journal was created with support of Springer. We are very grateful. It's owned by Springer. You have to know that. So it's was their first emphasis on demographics, publishing in demographic journals. If you now look at the Springer Nature list of journals, there is a large number. All our major competitors are also issued by Springer, so to speak, in a global sense, let's say like Demography or the Review of Household Economics or the Economics Journal on Aging and so on. So that was all past. Now, one of the very nice board meetings, we had many board meetings over these decades, so to speak, since 1988, every year. One of the nicest I remember to have had in Izmir in 2015, and this is a photo of the board meeting at the time, and you see left to me Sandro Ginyu and Katharina Wetzel-Wandai next, and Erdal Tekin, who is also all of them are now at the panel today. And while we are all looking at the camera, the guy behind us on the wall looked somewhere else. It's a famous Atatürk, which is important to know. And we have been at the universities there in Izmir, and as I say, it was a very wonderful event, not only productive from inside, but also nice to have. I still remember the nice dinner at the water in the harbor, together with all of you, and even Sandro's family joining us, where we were sitting outside and enjoying. And we all, of course, miss these kind of meetings, and I would wish we could have such kind of a meeting at another time in a nicer environment than we have now. Now, yeah, that's Sandro as he lives, and he looks as energetic and active as ever, and we are very happy to have him here around. So the panel participants include Sandro and myself, of course. Xiaoshang Fang is somewhere in the train in China, and hopefully is with us now. Okay, this is globalism. Oded Galler, I've already seen being present. Hi, Oded. Well, Fang is an editor since 2020, just a recent one. Oded Galler came in before 2019, but he has a very legendary role in his own Journal of Economic Growth, where he is still the editor-in-chief, so he has lots of experience in publishing. Then we have Pierre Pistio, as I already mentioned him. He was an editor in the early 1998 to 1995, and he was also editor. All of these people have been editors at many other journals, but he was a co-editor of the Journal of Public Economics. Then, hopefully around, Erdal Tekin, the editor of the Journal of Population Economics for over 8 years, 2010 to 2018. He is now the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Policy Analysis and Management. For those who are working in the policy area, you know that this is a very, very influential journal, highly ranked. And we have, last but not least, Yunsen Sang. He was editor for many years, 2001 and 2019. And he is now the co-editor of the Journal of Human Resources, one of our most prominent competitors. So competition is good. We are all economists, so they don't take that remark serious. It's very important to have a number. It's what I believe a number of journals dealing with population economics issues. This was not the case when we started the journal in 1988. You may not believe that. Maybe it's even now similar, a bit similar to some extent, but at least in 1988, population economics was neither part of economics nor of demography. So what this means actually, if you were meeting demographers, is we would say, well, you're an economist, you have nothing to say about population issues. And if you would talk to economists, they would say, well, this is not a hardcore topic. Fertility. I wrote my thesis on fertility, yes, and the first reaction of my thesis supervisor, who was a great guy, but he was saying, well, what do you want with that topic? You will not be taken serious. So that was a kind of the situation under which we created the journal around 1988, also with the ambition to build up the area to make population economics a field which is rich and influential and powerful. And the question is, have we reached that? Maybe not yet fully, but that's the issue we are here now. What are the advances and challenges of publishing in population economics today? How broad is population economics defined these days? Or how is the role of theory versus empirical research developing? And how do we deal with other disciplines? What are the roles of editors in this process? And what are your personal motives to do so, to do this service to the profession? And what do we owe people like Sandro Cigno? This is the kind of idea we would like to deal with. So I leave that here. And now I ask the panel members in the order we had agreed to move in and to say a few words. So please, who would like to start? Pierre, I thought you would be first. Are you here? Okay, so we do have a problem, Michaela? Maybe we can start with Shaisang.
Hello.
Because we have you here.
Hello, Klaus.
Yes.
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Because I just arrived at the hotel from the train station, so I'm kind of good. Now I can see myself. Yeah. Thank you. So okay. First of all, let me take this opportunity to congratulate Professor Yun Qiu, Professor Wei Shi, and Professor Xi Chen for the Kuznets Prize. This is great, especially two of the winners from Jinan University. So I'm very proud of them. And I should also mention that I have played absolutely no role in their winning of this prestigious Kuznets Prize. I was only informed by Klaus afterwards. Anyway, yeah, I think let me also take this opportunity to say that it has been a great honor, obviously, to be an editor of Journal of Population Economics. We see, the new generations of editors, and we are paying tribute to our predecessors, Professor Alexander Signal. So it made us realize that it is a tremendous responsibility for us to keep Journal of Population of Economics high quality, and to be to be an excellent outlet for the population related research. So I think Klaus, I will be very brief. So Klaus raised many important questions. I try to provide my perspective. I think different editors they should have somewhat slightly different perspectives. To me, I have been thinking of the issue: what kind of papers should be published in Journal of Population Economics in the future? And I think we should aim to publish papers that provide an economic analysis of population-related issues. This should be, the exact topics should be can be very broad, but it should be economic analysis. It I think slightly different from demography, right? So after all, this is population economics, not demography. I think in my opinion, there are three things that we should pay specific attention. First, regarding the topic importance and novelty, I think whether the research question is important or not, or whether it's innovative is so important. Like from my experience, I see some papers that just describe a very specific phenomena, maybe in a particular time and maybe related to a particular geographic region without trying to explore its general relevance. And also there are other papers where you can just judge their contribution from the title of the paper. Those are, I think bad examples. On the other hand, I think the fast-track COVID papers handled by Klaus, I think that's really a good idea because we are acting very quick to taking care of a very important issue that has a very important practical relevance. Number two thing that I want to mention is still identification. I think people have been emphasizing that a lot. But also from my experience, I think, it is important. In order to publish a paper in a journal like Journal of Population Economics, you need to have very clear identification. Yeah, at least you should, I think, to pass certain bars to win the confidence of the referees and editors. My suggestion for, potential authors would be to use more credible identification methods and always be aware of the, the weaknesses of your method and try to defend it as much as you can. And the last part, the last thing I want to mention is that, the soundness of the empirical analysis, which means, in addition to, identification to a question, you need to have the appropriate data and variables. Sometimes the idea is great and the method is fine, but just the data are not sufficient to, to support it. So I think the empirical work need to be very carefully executed, robustness checks, etc. So I think, Klaus, that's my view, from my point of view of how, what kind of papers we should publish in Journal of Population Economics. I'm still relatively inexperienced, and I think during the past 1.5 years, I have learned a lot from, other people. And Klaus and Mikila have, helped me a lot. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for your help. Yeah, I think I will keep on working very hard to keep the journal of high quality. Okay, thank you, Klaus. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Now let's try to move to Pierre Pestiot. I realize that he is around. Pierre?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful. I see you.
Okay,
great.
okay.
Yeah, we all see you. We all see you.
It was nice to see the picture, of 30 years ago. We were a bit younger.
A bit.
Yeah. Well, Klaus, as you asked me, what I'm going to do now, it's, to say a few words on behalf of Sandro and to express my esteem of his scientific career and his personality. I have known Sandro for many years, and if I had to date it, I would say that our friendship go back to the early days of the European Society of Population Economics meeting. I have a great respect for his very long scientific career. His career is marked by excellence and consistency. Sandro offers a fine example of academic longevity. This type of longevity seems to be more common in Europe than in North America, it seems to be. And the explanation may be in the specific incentive structures that prevail in the two continents. My first scientific contact with Sandro was reading his remarkable book, Economics of the Family, published in 1991, one of the first book on the subject, which had a great influence on research in family and population economics. In Sandro research, I have mainly been interested by his work at the crossroads of population and public economics, And I could pinpoint a number of articles, but two of them, I mean, I find quite innovative. One is about, I mean, when he shows the implication of endogenous fertility on the development of the design of family policy. And there is also the article in which he studies social policy in the context of asymmetric information, in which you have many individual characteristics which cannot be observed. When we started the JPOP, the Journal of Population Economics, sorry, I confused the two journals I've been in charge of in my lifetime. When we started the Journal of Population Economics adventure, theory had an important role. Gradually, this role has diminished to almost disappear, at least it's a personal view. This development is not unique to population economics. It's no less regrettable. I sometimes have the feeling that, to use Charlie Koopman's expression, we have entered the era of measurement without theory. I am grateful to Sandro for having, over the past decades, pursued the idea that all empirical work needs to be preceded by sound theory. My hope is that soon we will experience a period with more concern for measurement with theory. Finally, a last word on the personality of Sandro. Sandro is a true gentleman, a well-managed, a well-rounded person whom I am happy to count among my friends. He has had an indisputable and lasting influence on our discipline, population economics. That's what I wanted to say. Following your request, Klaus.
I have to unmute me. Sorry, thank you very much, yes, for your intervention. That's exactly what I thought I could hear from you, and you could say it also from a long-term experience and look on the scene. And so thank you very much for your contribution. Now let's go on first in the round to Yun-Sen Sang, who's also a long-term editor of the journal. Yun-Sen, I know you are there. Yes, well, this is Erdal Tekin, but Yun-Sen, we should have Yun-Sen first, if possible. Yes,
okay,
I see you, Yun-Sen.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and now even we can see you a bit. Yes, this is perfect. Now
we have
your, okay, perfect. So please
it's
give us
great to see
your
so
opinion.
many of you. Yes, I share what has been said about Sandro. Starting personally, he's a true gentleman. Yeah. And secondly, he is really a true scholar, very devoted, always talk about research. I recall I invited him once to Hong Kong, and during the whole period of visit, he always talk about research, and we actually have some overlapping in research. I recall we did something on economics of the pension with endogenous fertility. So I think we had some discussion or disagreement, but I think together the two of us push the research frontier forward. So it has been a great experience to work with people like Sandro for the journal and also with Klaus. So I will miss him. And I hope he will visit Hong Kong or China again soon. Hopefully with retirement, he can now has more free time to travel. Yeah, so just my short remark to pay the highest respect to Sandro. Yes.
Thank you very much, Yun-Sen. I think yes, he is not retiring really. I mean, so far I guess if I know him right, he will go on writing papers. I have just seen new stuff from him, even getting just published, and other things came out. So he is not yet at the end with his contributions, and we are waiting for it, of course. I share that with you. The problem is traveling. We'll see how it develops. At the moment, we have to use technology. So thank you very much, Yun-Sen, for the moment. Let's go over first in my list to Erdal Tekin, who would be next. Erdal now jumped from Hong Kong to Washington, I guess.
That's right. Hello, everybody. Hi, Klaus. Hi, Sandro. Let me say a few words about Sandro. I met Sandro in 2010 when I became an editor of one of the editors of Journal of Population Economics. I always have fun memories of Sandro. He is an extremely well-accomplished scholar. He achieved at the highest levels professionally. But what I also like about Sandro, and I admire tremendously, is that while accomplishing at the highest levels professionally, he also managed to have a full life, and something that I admire tremendously. We had these day-long, exhausting meetings of the journal in the month of June every year in a beautiful city. Those meetings were exhausting. We had so many issues to discuss, and Sandro always had this serious and thoughtful approach to questions and the issues, but he also blended his seriousness and thoughtfulness with a sense of humor and wisdom. And I will always remember him as the person with wisdom and humor in the room. And I think there are so many great scholars in our profession, and that's fine. And many of us focus on perfecting ourselves professionally, pursuing academic excellence, and that is fine. But there are, I think, very few people who has achieved such excellence in profession scientifically, while also without compromising, I should say, other colors of life. And that's one of the things that I really admire about Sandro. I feel myself lucky to have known him, not as a scholar, but also as a person. I will always, remember his affection for good food, good wine, and the person in the room who calms everyone and brings humor and wisdom. So, I wish him well in his retirement, but I'm also happy to hear that he will continue to remain active in terms of research, and I hope to see him in future events. So I don't know if I have time to answer the other questions, but maybe I should stop here, Klaus. What do you think?
Well, yes, maybe it's a moment. For the moment, we can come back if we still have time. Thank you very much. We cannot solve all these issues today, I understand. So now in my list of participants, it's now the turn for Oded Geller, who brings in short tenure with the journal only, but he was involved. I know that Oded. As a referee and friend and supporter and associate editor, of course, for a very long period also. So you are not, so to speak, not new. So please give us your insights on the topic and Sandro, whatever you wish. Okay.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, as you said, I had benefited from interacting with Sandro only over a very short period of time. And much of this interaction was electronically, so I cannot share your appreciation for his taste for food or good wine. But nevertheless, I mean, naturally over the time, I read his scholarship and I was deeply impressed. And I interacted with him orally, and naturally I was deeply impressed by his wisdom, by his devotion to scholarship, and by his great judgment. And I think that we will all miss him very, very profoundly. And let me move into the broad issue of the field and my role in the field of population economics. So if you think about my career and my interest in general, my interest was in what I perceive to be the most fundamental questions in the field of economics, or perhaps even the most fundamental questions in the way that we perceived humanity. And the questions that I typically ask, or the two mysteries that I try to resolve, are what I defined as the mystery of growth and the mystery of inequality. And the mystery of growth is trying to resolve a fundamental question, which is, why is it the case that over most of human existence, literally 99.9% of human existence, economies are in a state of stagnation, and then suddenly, in the course of industrialization, in the past 2 centuries, we see this dramatic takeoff from stagnation to growth, and an increase in the standard of living in the world economy, the magnitude of about 17-fold. Now, the second mystery that I was interested in, and it is a related mystery, is this increase in inequality, the mystery of inequality, this incredible increase in inequality in the world economy, inequality across countries, inequality across regions, etc. And again, this transition from stagnation to growth generated this wide diversion in income per capita across the globe, and income per capita between the richest regions of the world and the poorest one increased from a ratio of about 3-to-1 in 1800 to about 20-to-1 at the moment. Now, intimately related to the resolution of these two questions is demography. And what I learned to appreciate is the importance of population economics and demography in general, demographical patterns, in the understanding of these two fundamental mysteries. Namely, how in the course of human history, population evolved both in terms of size and composition, namely how the Malthusian pressure generated certain changes both in the size of the population and the composition of the population, and ultimately how these changes in the size and the composition of the population affected the process of economic growth. So critical to the understanding of this, as I said, are these evolutionary processes and in particular the demographic transition, namely the forces that ultimately contributed to the decline in fertility and permitted the world economy to move into a state of sustained economic growth. And lastly, one thing that should interest us more than interest us at the moment is the understanding of the compatibility of economic growth with preservation of the environment. So naturally, we all have concerns about environmental degradation. We understand that economic growth perhaps is incompatible with environmental degradation, but here there is a key insight, namely, it is the decline in fertility and the projected decline in fertility that can ultimately rescue planet Earth from environmental degradation. Namely, we can have compatible growth process with environmental preservation if in fact this growth will be propelled predominantly by declining population. Because as one can show empirically, it is primarily the effect of the size of the population on the environment that matters rather than income per capita and its impact on the environment. So let me stop here. As I said, I think that the Journal of Population Economics and the field of population economics is well positioned to tackle some of the most fundamental questions that are facing humanity. First, the understanding of global inequality, and second, the understanding of the effect of demographic factors on the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Oded. This gave us another perspective on this very complex pattern we are dealing here. And the last aspect, before I do my last words here too, can contribute Katharina Wetzel-Wandai. She speaks for the publishing house. Katharina, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm here to represent the Springer publisher, and I'm very honored to be on the panel with all of you, having been related to the Journal of Population Economics for so many years and decades. I'm happy to have had the chance to accompany the journal for 10 years now, after all. For Springer, the Journal of Population Economics is a so-called high visibility journal. This label says it all and shows how the journal increased and developed in the 33 years of its existence, during which it has become one of the highest ranked journals of our economics portfolio. When I started 20 years ago with Springer, some scientists and publishers already spoke about e-publishing, but it still seemed to be an ambitious fantasy. Since then, journal publication has changed a lot. Only a few years later, in 2004, Springer published all of their journals online, and online publication became the standard within a short time. Today, print issues have become nearly unavailable. Now, as a next step, the journey is headed towards open access. Springer already publishes the most significant open access portfolio in the world and is currently transforming its journal portfolio step by step. The Journal of Population Economics, being part of this transformation, already publishes 20% of open access articles, which is helpful in getting more visibility and more citations. During all this time of transformation, Sandro, you have always been a real pleasure to work with, reliable, punctual, and with the necessary Italian relaxed manner. We met several times in person, also at some of the Italian economic annual meetings. I remember one has been in Naples. And I remember that you never said no to a good glass of wine. Thank you for all your commitment. As a small present, I will send you an online voucher for the acquisition of Springer books, and I really hope that we will soon have the chance to once again drink a glass of wine together. Chin chin.
Thank you very much, Katharina. Now it's my turn to say a last word before we hand over to Sandro. I already put my appreciation on the table for our long-term collaboration. And you have been one of the first people in this journal. We were leading the work over decades now. It's unbelievable. Well, I realize that you're more than what I heard so far, I would say. I would argue that you're also a family man, yes? So practically every year over the last 15 years or so, I had the pleasure to meet not only you in person, but your wife and son. And I was very impressed by how you were dealing and acting with them. So then on the personal level, I also think that you are very much concerned about your country and the well-being of Italians at this COVID time. We had this interview a few weeks ago for the GLO website where this was clear, and implicitly my answer was, so to speak, to have a couple of papers on COVID and Italy in this issue. If you look at the names and affiliations of the 4 authors which are coming in the next session, they are basically the answer contribute to the answer to respond to the COVID situation. Of course, what Pierre Pestiot said, theory has more problems these days, and losing you will increase our problem at this stage, but we will have an eye on it. And I agree that measuring without theory is problematic issue. Now, I've learned you as a modest, high quality person but who knows what he's doing and talking about. And I also appreciate and know that I can call you my friend, and I hope this will continue to go for the many years to come. So please, it's now your turn to answer to us, and let's see how we can listen to you. Thank you very much. Yes, here he is.
Well, in order to hide my obvious embarrassment at all the compliments I received tonight, let me...
You present a paper now, or what?
Let me tell you how I taught the British to correctly pronounce my family name. I said, can you say Cinzano? Cinzano. Can you say cognac? Cognac. Then you can say Cigno.
Cigno.
Okay, now Michaela, who has only known me for a short time, is forgiven for calling me Cigno. But Klaus, that I have known since he was in short trousers, is not. Okay, thank you. Well, what shall I say? Apart from, from the compliments to myself, I agree with everything that was said by previous speakers. Although it may sound pompous, I'm always being guided by the scientific methods, which consists in a continuous dialogue between theory and empirics. One may start from the observation of some empirical regularities and there try to figure out the theory that generates those phenomena, or starts from a theoretical intuition and then try and produce an empirically falsifiable model that can be compared with the data. But you need both. You need both, no matter where you start. And of course, once you have a model which stands up, then comes the normative aspect. You must, in order to talk of policy, you must have a normative model which says what the policy should be about. Designing policy without theory is like doing medicine without biology. Then you have the thalidomide children being produced. Okay, and this is what I've tried to do as this has been my line as an editor. I've always favored contributions which were either theoretical or had a theory basis. I mean, empirical papers, I like empirical papers which are theory based and not just pure data description. Now, of course, you know, when I started in the last century, and I should say in the last millennium to do this job, we did mostly theory because there weren't data and there weren't computers, or rather there were only mainframe computers. So naturally, we filled the gaps in empirical knowledge with theory. Now I'm afraid we have gone too much the other end. We have so many data and we have so many, so many technical devices at our fingertip that we're tempted to go the other way. Now, I don't know if anybody is interested in my personal trajectory. I suppose not even my mother was when she was alive. But let me tell you that I started from a very different, very different point. At the beginning of my career, I was interested in the representation of dynamic processes via dynamic activity analysis. That's where I started. And what this produced was my 1971 one article in the Review of Economic Studies, which had a 5-line title, like a 1970s movies. Production and investment respond, ta-da-dum, ta-da-dum, ta-da-dum. And then the second product of this was following my visit to Madison, Wisconsin, when I got together with Richard Day, who is the father of recursive programming, and we produced a book, a North Holland book, which was called Modeling Economic Change, Dynamic Programming Approach, in which I did what now would be called sort of ante litteram, a computable dynamic general equilibrium model. Okay, and on that occasion, while I was in Madison, I got in touch with an eminent member of the Club of Rome. Whose name escapes me right now, of course. Yes, with Jay Forrester at MIT and his team, okay, who were using models in a way similar to mine in order to predict the limits to growth, to examine how far the economy could progress given the boundaries of natural resources. And I added population to that, and there was another Review of Economic Studies article later, which in 1981, which was growth with exhaustible resources, in which there was this balance between exhaustible resources, population, and production. And then from there, I went on to become interested in the micro foundations of all this and in the normative approach to that, in the normative approach to this. And in this, just as a joke, I don't know if my old friend and erstwhile colleague, Tony Lancaster, is listening in. When I started to do these things, you know, in those days, there wasn't internet, of course. There were hardly any desk computers either. And so you didn't know what other people were doing, especially if they were on the other side of the ocean. And you had to go to the library, and browsing meant literally leafing through pages. So you didn't know what other people. And he had been visiting the States, and he came back and he said, oh, you know, there is a chap over there in the States who does things similar to yours. Oh, really? I said, fancy that. Who is he? Oh, a certain Gary Becker. So that was about the 1902 and 1901. So I went and looked him up, and I saw that he had done all we know. Okay, and then as a punishment for having discovered him too late, in 1991. In 1991, the year in which Ron Coase got the Nobel Prize for Economics, that was the jubilee year of the Nobel Prize, and all living Nobel Prizes were invited to Stockholm, and there were lots of seminars and so on, and then there were also second and third rankers invited. Well, second ranker then was Gary Becker, who was already thought as a possible future Nobel Prize. In fact, he got the economics Nobel the year after. And I was asked to be his discussant, that is to criticize and explain his work on dynamic models with population and with population in it, okay, with endogenous population. Okay, be that as it may, well, thank you, Pierre, for remembering my feeble attempts at doing public economics with endogenous fertility and with the family as a subject rather than the individual and the firm. And I've always appreciated your work in that, and we have dialogued many times over this subject. So I'm very glad. I'm very glad to have met you and to be among your friends. I think my time is up. Is that right, Klaus?
Yes.
So let me just say one thing. We are going to talk about COVID. Is that right? Next paper. Now, one of the side effects of this pandemic has been, of course, an acceleration of technical progress in information technology, especially in the development of platforms for teaching, researching, and so on. This is positive. The undesirable side effect of that was that people of my generation and younger, like Pierre Pestiot, found themselves in difficulty, okay? Because people who still have something to say have a difficulty in saying it and in communicating with others because we haven't mastered the newfangled ideas and techniques. Now, let me say that the only reason why someone like myself who is still baffled by wireless telegraphy, the only reason why I am able to teach online, because we are in lockdown in Italy, as you may know, the only reason why I can teach online and I can interact with my colleagues is because my wife, who I hope is listening in, took me by the hand and gently led me over the digital divide. Okay, otherwise I would be another World War II relic to be visited in museums. Okay, thank you all very much for being so kind to me. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Sandro, and we all clap to show our respect and gratitude. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for the presents. Thank you for the presents. My current account is always open for donations.
And here is his wife's.
Un saluto.
Great to see you. Great
Well, my wife
again.
has been named, and so she's felt authorized to appear before you.
Un saluto a tutti. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Saluto,
Bye-bye.
saluto.
Okay, thank you. Great. Now we move over. Michaela, you have to take over and go on.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you as well for a very moving and personal discussion about the past of the journal and also its future. We are now, of course, moving into the final session of the day, where we will have several papers that are recently published in issue 1 of 2021, relating to the insights and the evidence on the consequences and policy responses to COVID-19. This panel will be chaired by the other managing editor, Madeline Chewotny, who I will now pass over to. Thank you very much, Madeline.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So just a quick reminder of what we're going to be up to for the next 50 minutes or so before we have to adjourn for the day. So we have 4 papers related to COVID-19 that we'll be seeing a presentation on. Each presenter will get about 10 minutes. Hopefully we can take maybe one question after. So if you have a question, please post it in the chat or the Q&A. And I will let the presenters introduce themselves and their papers, and I'll just hand it over now to Fabio Milani. If you could share your screen with us, Fabio.
Thank you. Let me share the screen. So my name is Fabio. Just to thank the JOPE for this session that for some reason has been completely cornered by Italian speakers, given all of us are from Italy. Okay, let me talk about my work. So in this paper, I'm trying to study the social, behavioral, and partial economic responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in particular, the research tries to stress the importance of understanding countries' interconnections. And I do that using exploiting some data about social networks and social connections between different pairs of countries. And that's done using some data that are made available by Facebook. And as a framework for the empirical analysis, I use a global VAR model, which allows me to consider interactions between social variables and COVID cases, but also potential spillovers across a large number of countries. So different and complex spillovers among many countries. I can tell you already the main takeaways from the empirical results, and probably more importantly, the main result is that responses of different populations in different countries are significantly influenced by what happens in other countries, even countries that are far away. So developments abroad in terms of cases, in terms of perceptions about the risk of getting coronavirus, and even behavior in terms of social distancing in most countries are affected by what happens in other countries, especially if these countries have strong social connections with the previous country. Italy plays clearly a large role at the beginning of the pandemic, and then the US takes the largest role, and then a little later Spain and the UK as well. In the different situations, the responses of countries to their own COVID cases are heterogeneous, but we find some common patterns. Most responses are always delayed. There is a lag in responding, and also very gradual, very sluggish. So we see that there is some learning behavior. Let's say citizens in US or Brazil look at what happens in Europe or in Italy and learn something about it, so they adjust their perceptions and adjust their social distancing behavior, but very slowly, with some delay of a few days, and also not adjusting immediately, but very, very gradually to what happens in other countries. Okay, so in terms of data, I exploit first data on social connections provided by Facebook, and I use this social connectedness indicator that has been provided in other papers, for example, by Bailey et al., and used also to study the transmission of coronavirus cases. So these data include the number of friendships between pairs of countries, and as a fraction of the total number of users in the two countries. And it should be able to account for regular friendships, but also business ties, family ties, and patterns of migration, both in the previous century and in more recent patterns of migration, or also for tourism. And the original paper by Bailey, for example, provides some empirical analysis that these data really capture this sort of ties. And as an example, if we look at Italy as the reference country, we see that the darker the blue that you see, the stronger the social networks existing between Italy and this other country. So for Italy, we see that there are strong connections with neighboring countries like Slovenia and Switzerland, with Germany, Spain, and so on. But we would miss something if we simply use a measure of distance. So for example, there are strong connections between Italy and Australia, or Italy and the US, that are stronger than connections between Italy and Turkey, for example, or some countries in Eastern Europe. So just by using distance, we are gonna miss some of these social networks that are instead picked up a little better by using these actual Facebook connections. And for each country, we would have the same kind of information specific to each one of our 41 countries. Okay, so in addition to the social networks, to understand these interconnections existing across countries, for each country, I use 4 series that account for the outbreak, so using the growth rate of COVID-19 cases from Johns Hopkins, and other data to account for social responses and perceptions. So as a measure of the behavioral response, I use data on social distancing using the decline in mobility provided by the Google Social Mobility Reports. And those are obtained by Google from tracking the location of mobile devices. So it's not a policy or a mandate, but it's the actual behavior in terms of how much the population is engaging in social distancing in different countries over time. So all these data are daily, so for each day, how much they reduce their mobility. Then in terms of ideas and perceptions, I use Google Trends to identify for each country the perception about the risk of coronavirus, with people searching things like coronavirus symptoms, what to do in case of coronavirus, and so on. So all the searches related to the topic of coronavirus. And as an indicator of unemployment, as shown in other papers, even by Klaus, for example, I also use Google Trends as a daily indicator that is connected to unemployment. And given that we don't have available the actual data at this frequency and so quickly. Okay, as an empirical framework, I use a global VAR model that's based on the work by Hash and Pesaran in different papers. And to understand this model, you can think about, for each country, we have these 4 indicators that are mentioned. And these indicators are allowed to depend on their own past values, but also on global variables or foreign variables. So they depend on these X star foreign variables. And X star are the same variables, but for the rest of the world. And they are computed based on all these other indicators with weights collected in these W bar metrics that depend on the extent of social connections. So Italy would be more affected by Spain than by Turkey, for example. So in this way, you can think of these as simple VARs for each country with some influence of global variables. But then when all of them are stacked together for all the countries, you can actually solve the global VARs so that every country is allowed to depend partially by all other country, by variables in other countries in the sample. So these frameworks allow you to capture endogeneity, the fact that social distancing responds to the number of COVID cases, but also vice versa, that COVID responds to social distancing policies. And it can account for complex spillovers from different countries in a very parsimonious way. I estimate this model using daily observations from February to April in the first part of the pandemic, at least outside of China. And then I extend it to April to June for these 41 countries, either OECD or still countries of interest for the OECD. So in terms of the main results, the first result is that there exist very significant spillovers from foreign countries to almost every country in the sample. And these spillovers are both in terms of COVID cases. So you see here, just for a selection of countries, most COVID cases in a country are clearly influenced by previous cases or current cases in other countries because of travel, but also not just cases, but also ideas and behavior. So perceptions about coronavirus risk in these countries are affected by what happens abroad in other countries. And the same for social distancing behavior. Something happens in Italy, even if coronavirus cases in my country are still not so predominant, but still there is an adjustment in behavior, an adjustment in perception, an adjustment in behavior because of something that happens somewhere else in the world. This is true almost everywhere, let's say with the exception of countries that are a little bit less connected, like India and Brazil, in which maybe the idea was that it would take a while before the situation in Europe would transfer to these countries farther away. Okay, second, and still in the same with the same idea, shocks that happen in countries like Italy at the beginning, later on US and so on, have a very large effect everywhere in the world. So here I show the response of risk perceptions about coronavirus in the countries in the sample to an increase in COVID-19 cases in Italy. So you see that in most countries, there is a significant increase in risk perceptions. Let's say Spain, the effect is very strong, but there is an effect pretty much everywhere, with the exception maybe of Korea and Japan, which already responded before to China. So for them, Italy was not as relevant. But basically, risk perceptions increase because of something that happens in Italy, pretty much everywhere, but also in terms of behavior. Here is the actual social mobility indicator from Google. Social mobility decreases pretty much everywhere in the world. Again, it's very clear in Spain, but you see in other countries, Portugal, Slovenia, and so on. So again, increasing coronavirus cases in Italy and social distancing that actually increases almost everywhere in the world. Something to notice, however, is that the increase is not immediate. Even if we take the case of Spain, when things get worse in Italy, the Spanish population doesn't adjust the behavior immediately, but it takes around a week or more to really change more significantly the behavior. And then the behavior sluggishly continue for a while. So there is learning from these other countries, but with delays and with some sluggish adjustment. Okay, one can argue that some of these results may be due to the fact that some policies were mandated more or less around the same time in many of these countries. But that's not actually the whole story, because by using data on voluntary social distancing, I show that if you just think of regressing social mobility on these policy indicators about lockdowns, you see that the two do not exactly have the same information. In the second panel, you have the R-square from this regression. And in some countries, there is a big connection between social distancing by the population and the policies by the government. But many times, the relationship is not perfect or even almost non-existent, like in Denmark and Sweden and some other countries. Even in the US, if I see this correctly, around 50% is explained by the actual policy. So that's why the paper argues that it's important not to use the policies themselves necessarily, but the actual voluntary behavior in terms of social distancing. Okay, and just a couple of the last two results. If we look at a single country and the response of the behavior in the country to its own coronavirus situation, we see that these responses are very heterogeneous. So in the first panel, we see that when coronavirus cases increase, in some countries adjust their social mobility a lot. Red is Spain and blue is Italy, following the soccer team's jerseys. And other countries like Sweden, US, UK do not adjust their social distancing much. Okay, and that's consistent with what we sort of know. In the second case, looking at the response of unemployment, the response of unemployment is not incredibly large in comparison, because there are two countries in which unemployment really spikes much more than in the rest of the world, and those are the US and Spain, because of some particular features of their job markets, see unemployment increase much more than in the rest of the world. So there is this clear heterogeneity in how countries respond. And the final result that I wanted to show today, and try to keep in 10 minutes, is looking at the benefits of social distancing. Countries that seriously perform social distancing, like Italy and Spain, see that social distancing is effective in reducing the number of COVID cases in this period. So you can pick this up even with a simpler linear model without using SEER or SAIR type of models that have all more complicated nonlinearities. While in other countries like the UK, social distancing is not as effective because it was a little bit less strict than in Italy and Spain, for example. Okay, so I just conclude re-emphasizing some of the idea and the results. So the paper stresses the importance of, sorry?
Fabio, luckily the paper's already published and online, so I think that in the interest of time, we will let everyone read the slide for conclusions, while you perhaps just give us a very quick, update. Have things gotten better or worse in terms of the lags in responding?
So I think the interesting thing is that for cases, we have seen that things have remained the same with the spillovers continuing for cases. We have seen in Europe flows in tourism, in different countries, driving the second wave in Europe, for example, in Italy. But the thing that is missing from the data for this sample, February, April to June, is a second set of spillovers that I think is interesting, that is on ideas related to denialism and no mask and protests that quickly also moved around the world. I remember when they started in the US near where I live in Huntington Beach, and that seemed very strange, but they quickly spread around the world, now in Germany, recently in Italy, in Rome, and so on. So that's the part that is missing here, because here was really perception about how risky this disease is, but there is nothing about denial or COVID doesn't exist. And that also spread around the world very, very quickly. So that's the part that I think is missing.
Well, we look forward to seeing your next paper on that, certainly. And I encourage all of you to either send Fabio an email or follow up in the chat with if you have feedback for him on the paper. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to our second article about COVID-19 by Domenico. Again, Domenico, if you could share your screen. Thank you. 10 minutes.
Thank you. Can you see me?
We can hear you, but not see you. We do see your screen.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the paper in this very important event, and my congratulations to the winners of the Kuznets Prize for their very important paper, which I love, and that indeed is part of my references. In this paper, I estimate the number of deaths, number of infection and mortality rates from COVID-19 in the Italian region of Lombardia during March 2020. I focus on Lombardia for two reasons. The first reason, the most important, is that I grew up in Lombardia. So there's a joke, of course, that this was the most emotional paper that I've written in my life so far. The second most important reason is that Lombardia was the first Western region where COVID-19 was discovered. And this led the Italian government to introduce strict lockdown while monitoring the indicators that I estimate in this paper to make a decision about the rigidity or the flexibility of the lockdown. So this indicator was desperately needed. And to this aim, the Italian Civil Protection Department, Protezione Civile, started to provide data on the number of deaths, number of cases, and number of swabs. But these data were referred to the individuals who were actually tested against the virus. Broadly at the same time, the Italian National Statistical Institute, ISTAT, started providing data on mortality at municipal levels. However, because the shock was largely unexpected, ISTAT could provide the data only for a subsample of Italian municipalities, and therefore what they did was to provide this data only for municipalities which experienced at least 10 deaths since the beginning of the year, and an increase in mortality between in March 2019 versus 2020, at least of 20%. Therefore, both sources of data may be severely biased, and this is because they observe only a teeny fraction of the population, and in this respect, they may provide an upward bias of the relevant indicators. To avoid this drawback, what I propose to do in this paper is to use a different approach, and in particular, to use partial identification. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with partial identification. However, let me set the grounds for everybody. Partial identification combines the assumptions with the data so as to obtain a bounds for the quantities of interest. The larger or the stronger the assumptions that we are ready to make, the narrower the bounds. I would also like to point out that when I wrote this paper, the only other paper that used partial identification in the COVID-19 literature was a great contribution by Maschi and Molinari. In this talk, I don't want to go through the details. I just want to give you the idea of what I do with partial identification. As I mentioned, consider the case of mortality. As I mentioned, ISTAT provided the data only for some municipalities. Therefore, the total Italian municipality are given by the sum of observed municipalities and unobserved municipalities. We know everything about observed municipalities, but we don't know anything about unobserved municipalities. Therefore, the main difficulty is about recovering mortality in unobserved municipalities. To do this, we can closely read what the ISTAT, what was the approach implemented by ISTAT. ISTAT provided data for municipalities which experienced at least 10 deaths and at least 20% increase in mortality. Therefore, if a municipality is not observed, its mortality was at most 9 deaths since the beginning of the year, or less than 20% year-on-year increase in mortality. And this is how many deaths at most were recorded during the month of March in Lombardia. As for the lower bound, we need to make some assumptions. Here you see some of the assumptions that I proposed in the paper. Let me consider just the least demanding assumption, so no assumption at all. We know that at least the number of deaths in unobserved municipalities were 0, and therefore we derive this lower bound. We can make increasingly more restrictive assumptions. For example, consider the COVID-19 monotonicity. We work under the assumption that since COVID is not good, then mortality could not decrease in 2020 with respect to the previous year. And this leads to this lower bound of COVID-19 mortality. I also want to draw your attention to this difference in difference assumption, which was made by several researchers, and which imposes the assumption that the mortality in unobserved municipalities were equal to the mortality in observed municipalities. By imposing this assumption, we point identify the mortality. However, because of the sample selection, because of the sample selection procedure that I mentioned in the first slide, this approach is not to be recommended because of the usual sample selection bias explained by Ekman and the following literature. If this, at this point, we have a lower bound and an upper bound for mortality, which depend on the assumption that we make. If this machinery is clear, we can go on and consider the incidence of COVID-19. By definition, this is the ratio between patients suffering from COVID-19 and the population. We know the population, but about the patients suffering from COVID-19, we only know the outcome for patients who were actually tested against the virus, but we don't know anything about individuals who were untested. There are, however, two polar cases. In the first polar case, none of these guys is infected, whereas in the other polar case, all these guys are infected, and therefore you have this lower and upper bound for incidence of COVID-19. In Italy, we had a large scale experiment where all the citizens in 2 municipalities were tested, and the final result was that the proportion of asymptomatics to symptomatics individual was 5:1. Therefore, I can substitute for this proportion and obtain equation number 8, which is the other the other lower bound for COVID-19 infection. Once I have the mortality rate and once I have the mortality and the incidence of COVID-19, I can derive the mortality rate of COVID-19 by simply taking the ratio between these two quantities. So in the remaining part of my presentation, I'm going to implement this machinery. As for the number of deaths, there are 3 main points that I would like to emphasize. The first point is that the upper bound of mortality is derived by construction, and therefore it's fixed. It is about 20,000 deaths in March 2020 in Lombardia. As for the lower bound, the stronger the assumption that we impose, the narrower are the bounds. And you can see this as going from the top to the bottom of the table. When we impose the difference in difference assumption, we obtain more than 20,000 deaths. And this is a great result for this paper, from my viewpoint, because this number is inconsistent with the upper bound derived by the sample procedure of Easton. I was lucky enough because since the first submission till the acceptance of the paper, even though the submission process was very fast and I thanked very much the editor for this, is that provided the data, and indeed the true deaths in Lombardia are within the bounds that I estimate, and much lower than the difference in differences that was largely adopted by several researchers. I make the very same reasoning for COVID-19, and just to be on time, let me consider mortality rate. There was a big discussion in Italy because the mortality rate in Lombardia was believed to be extremely high, much higher than in the rest of the world. And indeed, using a difference in differences approach, it would be about 43%. However, when we use bounds, we see that the bounds are coherent with the 0.1% of patients infected, and therefore the observed mortality rate is perfectly coherent with what is observed in the rest of the world. I basically I can finish here. However, I'm sorry if I went too fast. However, this is a trick because you can find more details and replication files on my in the paper. So I kindly encourage you to download it and drop me a line if you have any question. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Domenico. I'm curious that I live in the United States, in Florida, where our numbers are probably vastly underreported. And I'm wondering, can researchers use your method in the case where they think there's just underreporting of deaths and cases?
Thank you. This is a very important question. The answer is yes, it is possible to use this same machinery in other contexts, in other countries. The only things that researchers should pay attention to is that different cases may likely consider different assumptions, because partial identification combines assumptions and the data. And therefore, if the mechanism of the underreporting is different, it might be the case that these assumptions work, but it might also be the case that other assumptions might be considered. I would also like to add that I consider these assumptions, but of course, one may consider also other assumptions. And one of the main features of partial identification is that the stronger the assumptions, the narrower the bounds. But of course, the larger the risk of identifying a wrong quantity. So there is this trade-off that one should consider very closely.
Well, for those of you who have not yet read these papers, we certainly direct all of you to the issue. It is those 4 papers and other wonderful ones as well. And so with that, certainly please send Domenico a chat or an email if you have follow-up on the paper. And I'd like to turn it over to our 3rd presenter, Fabrizio.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I hope it does work. Can you see my presentation? Please.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Okay. So first, let me thank you all. Perhaps sorry. And let me say thank also to the authors of the paper of the Kuznets Prize, because it has been very useful also for us, I share the same evaluation of the previous presenter. So first of all, let us say how we had the idea of making this paper. Since at the beginning of the pandemic, many of us, I think, was both with an anxiety attitude, but also in an nerdy attitude we have as economists and statisticians, try to stay in front of the data that the media used to publish about this new virus and the spread, the incredible convex shape of the spread of this virus. And a little bit astonished, we try to use our skill to understand what was happening, sometimes by also publishing our little tricks, elementary statistical elaboration in social media, or sometimes also in newspapers, something like that, just to explain what was happening. And by doing that, we realized that there was a very hard reliability of the data that we were using to make these, let's say, very rough studies. And in particular, we start to ask, what are we looking for exactly when we check daily the dynamics of the pandemic through this data provided basically by the media? So the number of new positive cases and so on. So in our opinion, there is a big issue of data reliability. And one of the relevant dimensions concerned is the delay occurring from the contagion up to the time it is recorded in statistics. So that is the point that what we see in aggregate statistics is something that happened a few time ago. And point is that social distancing measures have high economic and life quality costs, and there is need of a prompt assessment of their effectiveness. Time is very costly this time. So our aim was to provide a machine learning procedure that was able to promptly identify the structural breaks in the time series of COVID-19 cases, and thus to be able to assess promptly the effectiveness of the social distancing measures. In particular, there are very many dimensions of the delay between the contagion and the time it is effectively actually recorded in national statistics, in statistics in general. We have first of all, we have the time span, and is elapsing from infection to the first symptoms if one is symptomatic. If one is not symptomatic, let me say, in the case of asymptomatic people, the delay we have from the contagion to the detection can be whatever. So, but also with symptomatic people, we have the incubation time, which is it may last from 4 days, but up to 14 days, and the time span elapsing from the first symptoms up to the time medical authorities are contacted. So then the time needed for the delay to make tests and to communicate the results of the test, and then the time, the time from which the response of medical authorities is recorded in available statistical data. So the sum of all this delay is what we call the contagion detecting delay. So the point is that the delay can vary in time and in space. And it can vary in space, as an example, depending, because many of the components we just surveyed can be related to population characteristics, as the median age or health condition, average age condition of a particular territorial unit, or else because of the knowledge population have of the virus, so the time they need to react to the symptoms, as an example, from the available technologies that have been changing in time, since swab policies have changed and swap methodologies and techniques have changed in time. But also they can vary in space with according to the different health system infrastructures and the quality of these infrastructures, but also with local government strategies that adapt to national or regional strategies. And but also they can be very different according to the different kind of lockdown measures, because also the kind of lockdown measure can have an effect in can be different in terms of the time the effect of this lockdown measure is detected in data. As an example, we have this so-called announcement effect. As an example only, we can also have policies that lockdown measures that act before they are really implemented, because of we have this announcement. We expect just because we react before, because also behavioral people as we will see also are very important together with formal social distancing measure. The point is that we have no priors about the delay of each measure. And this suggests our original approach respect to the literature. I'm not going to the literature because it has also been updated, but the point is that we look for methodologies without priors about this delay. So we use a model selection, a machine learning algorithm to identify the dates of the structural breaks in the path of the COVID. And we estimate the overall detection delay for the 3 lockdown, so we can compare the effect of the 3 lockdown. And so we can also exploit the space heterogeneity of territorial units to look at some specific interaction with the COVID-19 dynamics, and then we will assess the performance of our procedure in terms of its ability to quickly identify occurring structural breaks. Basically, we have had what we consider is that the time span in which we had, in the case of Italy, which is our case study, 3 main lockdown. A lockdown basically consisting in shut down schools. Another lockdown, the main lockdown, with all the strong lockdown, the so-called, what is usually called by the news the lockdown, so which involves also shutdown of commercial activities, restriction of people mobility, and so on. And then the companies lockdown, so the shutdown on non-essential activities. Our main hypothesis is that the effect of a lockdown occurs as a structural break in the data. So, but we have no priors about the delay, the time at which these structural breaks occur. The reference period is the first month of the dynamic of the contagion in Italy, and we consider basically a simple structural break regression, in which we can find y, which is the dependent variable, the variation in positive recorded COVID-19 case, a vector of controls, and the time varying dummies, I, capital I, which are a dummy variable taking value 0 and 1 from the time t, the specific time t on. So let's say that the effect, as an example of the first structural breaks, is how the overall coefficient of the stock of positive case y, gamma 1 respect to gamma 1 plus gamma respect to the former coefficient gamma. So the idea is that when we arrive at time t1, we have a change in the coefficient of the variable y. That is the standard case for structural breaks analysis. So point is that t1, t2, and t3, so the time at which this dummy variable takes value 1, depends t3 and k, because we do not restrict for the number of cases of possible structural changes. So we also consider the case where there could be some other important changes in the dynamics of COVID, not depending on the policy lockdown measures. So, but these parameters, the number of both the number of the breaks and the parameter of the breaks, the time it is we activate the dummy variable, which changes unconstrained all along the reference period. So we then try different model specification but in any case, and this is also a novelty respect to some literature in macroeconometrics, we use the same information criteria both to select the time span, the delay, the number of structural breaks, and also to select the model. So we use the same information criteria for all the model procedure, model selection procedure. In the specific cases, we see that the delays from the day the lockdown measures become effective up to the day we record it as a structural break in aggregate data is 17 days for COVID-19, 17 days for the first lockdown, 19 for the second, and 10 for the third. So first of all, the delay can be very, very different according to the specific case, according to the specific to what is happening in the country. So we have cases of when we have cases in which you have the phases of boom of the spread or not. So, and we discuss it in the paper, I'm not going on, but point is that we show that there can be very different delays of the different measures and in terms of detecting this delay. So we can,
in the interest of time, could we just go to the conclusion?
Yes,
please?
I'm going to the conclusion. So we can assess with an econometric the impact of the different lockdown. So we have many conclusions about the different lockdown. Then we can interact the lockdown in variable with many different measures that can be used to discuss the property and to get some insights, specific insights in the effectiveness of this lockdown. But then what we do is we try to test our procedure as a methodology to have a promptly detection of the structural break. So what we do is we start from the 15 days of our sample, and then we see when, by using our procedure, we could have detected the different structural breaks. I'm not commenting the figure now, but point is that we are able with our procedure to detect the structural break and to also in terms of the extent of this confusion just the day after the lockdown. This is not true the 2 days after, 1 or 2 days after. This is not true for the third lockdown, for which we are 4 days, just because, but we see that we have seen that this lockdown has very little effect. But as an example, in this case, by using this methodology, we could have seen that the third measure could be not implemented, since it has been implemented when the effect of the second lockdown was just occurring. And it has been a very costly measure, but not most very effective in terms of containing the contagion. But I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. I've enjoyed reading all of the papers. I think one of the best things about my position is I get to read all of these wonderful papers that the journal publishes, and all 4 of these have been fabulous. In the interest of making sure that we get to hear all of Sergio's presentation, I think we just send questions or comments to Fabrizio, please. And Sergio, I will turn it over to you as our final paper on COVID-19 for the day, and then we'll go to Klaus for concluding comments after that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me congratulate the winners of the Kuznets Prize, and also let me thank my excellent co-authors, Luca and Giovanni. They are connected here, and also let me thank Klaus and the 4 referees of this paper, because they really contribute to improve our manuscript. So let me again thank you. Let me give you a quick introduction of the paper. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing structural effects
on the labor market in many countries. As a recent study by Klaus highlighted, the contagion speed of the novel coronavirus seems to be also favored by the globalization. In order to limit the number of deaths due to the virus, most governments in developed countries decided to adopt lockdown measures. In this context, the opportunity to work from home became of great importance, since it allows employees to continue working and thus receiving wage, the employers to keep producing services and revenues, and overall limits the infection spread risk and pandemic recessive impacts. But what the literature neglects is the potential effects of working from home along the wage distribution and on income inequality in general. In this paper here, we explore the potential consequences in the labor income distributions related to a long-lasting increase in working from home feasibility among the Italian employers. This is the story of the working from home in Italy. Before the COVID-19, the working from home was definitely not popular in Italy. Recent estimates report that among the EU 28 countries, Italy shows the lowest share of employed which have the opportunity to work from home. While during the pandemic, the working from home became much more popular and could turn into one ordinary way of working after the crisis. On June 17, for example, the Minister of Public Administration in Italy declared that 90% of public sector employees were engaged in the working from home during the phase 1. After the COVID-19, once companies and workers will incur significant fixed costs for remote work due to the technology, to the changes in production processing and updating of human capital, it is likely that we'll no longer want to go back. And therefore, the working from home is intended to be extended over time. Let me give you some quick information about the data in this paper here. Our analysis relies on a uniquely detailed data set based on the merge of two sample surveys, which are collected and managed by my institutions, by INAP. The first one is the INAP Plus for the year to 2018, which contains information on income, skills, education level, employment for about 45,000 working age Italians. The second one is a sample survey of the Italian Survey of Professions, which represents an Italian equivalent of the famous US ONET. The ICP provides detailed information on the task content of the occupation at the 5-digit ISCO classification level and allows to calculate the working from home index. Moreover, we merge our data set with one provided by the Italian Civil Protection Department on COVID-19 infection spread at the provincial level to investigate whether this potential increase in working from home would benefit more those areas of the country that have been affected the most by the novel virus, and thus will suffer worse economic consequences. Let me give you, after the restriction, the final sample is about 14,000 individuals. Let me give you some preliminary results. This figure here brings out that the economic activity sectors being characterized by the greater shares of employees with a high working from home feasibility are finance and insurance, the information and communication, the professional services, other businesses services, for example, car rental, travel agencies, employment agencies, and the public administration. The figure 1 also highlights that employees working in sector with high working from home feasibility receive on average a greater annual labor income than the others. It is among 27,000 versus 24,000. As a second figure, as for the potential differences across the labor income distribution, these figures clearly shows that the wage gap between the employees with a high and low working from home feasibility is increasing along the wage distribution and reached highest levels in the last two decile groups, as well as the same incidence of the high working from home feasibility among the employees. About the method we use the recentered influence function as an unconditional quantile regression method. It involves the calculation of this equation here. It is a counterfactual method. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just to give you an intuition, we determine a marginal change in the distribution of the working from home feasibility, swapping a 10 percentage points share of employees from one feasibility level to the other one. So obviously, such a percentage can be changed. It depends on policymakers. It depends on the aims of governments. And also in doing this, we control for a large number of demographic characteristics: the age, the gender, the education level, the migration status, and so on, and also for job characteristics, the job contract, sector dummies, and so on. Let me give you the main result of the paper. This table highlights that the positive shifts in the working from home feasibility levels would significantly influence the labor income distribution and inequality. Specifically, the RIF regression results suggest that the swapping a 10 percentage points share of employees from the low feasibility level to the high one would be associated to an increase of both the mean labor income and the Gini coefficient. By disaggregating by employees' characteristics, we find that the wage premium related to an increase of working from home feasibility mainly regards the male, further enlarging the gender pay gap, the graduated, the younger, and the older employees. This is on average, but looking at the working from home feasibility influence along the labor income distribution, which is the top left panel of this figure here, the 10 percentage points swap of employees from low to high working from home feasibility appears to reward more high paid employees. In particular, the highest wage premium would be reached at the 8th decile. The top right panel in figure 4 points out that the wage premium derived from the growth of the working from home feasibility levels would be mainly in favor of male employees, whereas that would represent a penalty for females ones, except for those in the last decile group. And also the wage premium among the graduated employees, which is the bottom right panel of this figure, are slightly greater with respect to the ones reported by the other group, in line with the skill bias technological change, if you know this kind of literature. We made a large number of robustness checks. You can find them in the paper. I skip on that just to notice that the most important to our experience is to control for the selection bias through an inverse probability weighting model. So this is the main robustness check we made in the paper. Let me give you the conclusions. The current crisis has forced many companies to a massive use of the working from home, and for some of them to think about a new normal way of working as a future challenge. This paper represents the first contribute to showing how a future increase in the working from home feasibility would be related to changes in labor income levels and inequality. Our results show that an increase in the working from home feasibility levels will be associated to a rise of labor income inequality among the employees, because it would tend to benefit more the male, the older, the graduated, and high paid employees. In conclusion, the working from home risks to exacerbate the pre-existing inequalities in the labor market, especially if it will not be adequately regulated. This crisis here giving a boost to the working from home, forcing companies to invest and to reorganize work even remotely. And this requires new skills, not only for workers, but also for managers and for entrepreneurs. In particular, long-term interventions filling the potential knowledge gaps are going to be therefore necessary to prevent the rise of inequalities in the labor market. First, childcare facilities and financial support to households with children are required to facilitate the adoption of working from home, especially for females employees with young children. And as a second policy suggestions, not surprising, two sets of education policies may be suggested. First one, increasing the school enrollment rate and improving the training courses. In particular, the latter will play an important role in reducing unequal distribution of benefits related to an increase of working from home opportunities by increasing human capital and pairing its complementarities with the technology. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. And thank you to all four of you for presenting these wonderful papers. Again, if you haven't read them, you definitely should run quickly to the journal and read them. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michaela.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, colleagues. To all of our panelists and speakers, thank you very much for your wonderful interventions. I think this has been a very successful discussion. I would like to thank as well our audience members. I've been monitoring a little bit who is in our room, and I noticed that we've had many colleagues from the Far East, from many time zones away. So I'd like to thank all of our colleagues from different sides of the ocean for joining us on this marathon discussion this afternoon. So once again, thank you very much for making this such a successful session, and we're very grateful for the interest that you've shown. Just as a very short wrap up, I wanted to let you know that the recording of this session will be available on the GLO website in the coming days. So should you like it, please have a check there. And once again, to anyone who is interested in seeing the papers, most of them are available in some form of open access or another. And you can, of course, find them on the journal website. So thank you once more for participating. It was a pleasure to see and hear many of you, and I hope that the occasion comes again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Klaus, for organizing this. I'm very grateful. And thank you all the others for tuning in. It was a really great occasion. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Everyone, be well.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao a tutti. Ciao.
See you all after COVID.
Yes, yes, pretty soon.